Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the RAU 175th Alumni Lecture. My name is John Payne, and let me just a couple of housekeeping points. Everybody will be on mute, but we will have a Q&A session later in the talk, and you'll see there's a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, so please use that to place your questions, and we'll come to those and give you a chance to answer and allow you to be unmuted for that. So a very warm welcome this evening, and thank you for joining this lecture, our 175th anniversary, but naturally in the RAU's 176th year. And thank you for giving up your time this evening on our second day of freedom. So now that we have some alternative ways of spending our evenings besides the usual Zoom calls and binge watching Line of Duty. So a warm welcome to everybody. I'm really delighted to have the opportunity of hearing from Christine Tacon and Max Pitman in this series of lectures that has featured RAU voices and learning from their experiences of the past to tackle the challenges of the future for our sector. We'll be hearing from someone who's had a highly successful career and someone who's just beginning their journey in the world of agriculture and food management. So let me just say a few words of introduction about Christine. Christine, I'm sure will tell you about her career in a moment, but a couple of headlines, particularly in relation to her connection with agriculture and land. Christine's current role is chair of Assured Food Standards, the company that operates the Red Tractor Assurance Scheme, and she joined on the 1st of January of this year. She also ran for a number of years the cooperatives farming business, and in fact in 2004 was awarded a CVE for her services to agriculture. And she's also chair of MDS, a training provider for graduates in the fresh food and produce sector, and a mentor to Max. Christine and I happen to work together at Red Tractor, and I have to applaud her for the impact that she has made since joining in January. Red Tractor, as you may know, is the UK's largest food and farming assurance scheme. And in 2020, we celebrated 20 years of ensuring that the world-leading standards of British food, that's safe, traceable, and farmed with care. And I think those standards are really more important than ever, as we've seen the impact of things like Brexit that's disrupted supply chains. The COVID impact has made consumers much more concerned about where their food comes from and what they eat. And also the looming trade deals have caused concerns over things like food standards. So I think this really is a time when British farming needs its flagship assurance scheme to be led with confidence and clarity. And those are qualities that I'm witnessing every day working with Christine as she makes her mark on the Red Tractor mark. Now for Max, and I haven't met Max, but Max studied international agribusiness at the RAU. He graduated last year, and he's now a graduate trainee at the Management Development Services. MDS is a partnership of companies that aims to equip young people with the experience, training, and mindset, so they have the confidence and ability to rapidly become senior leaders within our industry. And since joining MDS in October, Max has worked at Finsbury Food Group's East Kilbride Cake Factory. Finsbury Food are famous for making some spectacular products like the Star Wars and Harry Potter cakes, but I believe Max hasn't been quite fortunate enough to get onto that production line yet, and soon to be transferring to a role with Greenyard Fresh Foods in Spalding. One thing I've observed of graduates of the RAU is that it really equips them with exemplary skills to succeed in the workplace. And whilst I haven't met many MDS alumni, the feedback I hear across the board is that their graduates are also easily recognized by their flexibility, a can-do attitude, and very well-rounded individuals. So I think in Max's case, he's had the benefit of both organizations, the RAU and MDS. So I've got no doubt that Max is very well placed for a stellar career in the years ahead. So welcome everybody, and I'd now like to hand over to Max.
Good evening. I thought we'd get straight into it. And so I thought, Christine, would you mind giving us a brief overview of your career so far, and as you sort of go through it, what your sort of thought processes were and how, perhaps how your goals have changed from when you first left university to where you are today.
Of course I will. I should actually say though, John said he wouldn't go through my career because that was what Max and I were going to discuss. But you do need to know that I do actually chair MDS, and Max is one of the 83 graduates that we've got on the scheme, and we're both hoping to tell you a little bit about that because I think it's highly relevant to people who are at the RAU. So hopefully Max will get a chance to talk about that later. But I did feel I ought to, David Cameron, actually declare my interest before I zoom into answering all these questions. Right, so I think I was just trying to think how to start this and how to make it vaguely interesting. And I just thought, well, actually, if I just tell the truth, it is a bit bizarre. But I remember at the age of 14, we were taken on a school trip to, of all places, the Rolls-Royce aero engine factory in Derby. And we were all standing there and we'd been given our hats to wear and our coats. And I must admit, I wasn't looking forward to it at all. And we were told, wait here, the production manager will be in here soon to show you around. And the door opened and a woman walked in. And you could have knocked me over with a feather. It just never occurred to me that a woman would be running the aero engine production in Rolls-Royce in Derby. And I must have gone around with my tongue hanging out, just thinking, I want to be like you. And this woman impressed me so much that, I did science A-levels. I went to university and read engineering. And it was only when I was due to graduate, it never occurred to me to do anything beyond go into production management. But because I didn't really understand very much about aero engines, I was looking at things I understood. So was looking at businesses like Mars and Procter & Gamble and Unilever, and Coates Viella was one of them. And I think it was the year when everybody wanted their token woman engineer. So I had a lot of choices to make. And in the end, I went to work for Coates Viella because they offered me a job overseas and I wanted to speak languages. And that was how I ended up doing high precision zinc die casting in Germany. But there are lots of choices, lots of things went on after. I didn't understand anything about high precision zinc die casting either. But they used to make, the die castings made the zip that go on all of the clothes. Coates Viella used to make Jaeger clothes, country casuals, and that was how the zips were made. But by then, all of the tools are being used to make car parts. And nowadays, the business still exists, but it largely makes computer parts. So it's been a sort of a very interesting business to follow. But I think, having moved in from engineering, I then went back to work I went to work for Mars, who I hadn't taken their job from university, but felt afterwards I maybe should have done. And I worked there for 7 years. But I think the pattern to the jobs that I took was very much staying in production. I think most of my jobs are rectangular. I worked for Mars, which is rectangular. I worked for Anchor Butter, which is rectangular. I worked for Redland Bricks, which was rectangular. But that was just by chance. But the pattern in all of those is the fact that I was busy working away with my head down and I got a call from a headhunter. And I hadn't thought about moving jobs. And one of the things I always advise people now is quite early on in their career is to try and get themselves a mentor. And mentors they're never your parents or they're never your boss, not your teachers, but it's people that you pick up along your career that seem to have an interest in you and that help you. And I think if you identify somebody that's like that, sort of cling on to them and ask them for advice as you go through your career. But a lot of the choices that I made were made because a headhunter rang me up and flattered me. And I went and looked at the business and thought, actually, yes, maybe it is time for a change. And I think that makes it particularly difficult if you're an employer and you want to hold on to people, because however happy they are in their jobs, and I was always happy, I was easily tempted away by somebody flattering me like a headhunter does.
Okay, so I mean, you mentioned there that you had your head down, you were so focused on the sort of tasks you were doing, you never really looked to the horizon to look for change. Would that be something would you recommend, if you were to do it again, would you recommend people to sort of keep looking ahead or focus wholeheartedly on what they're doing and wait for opportunities essentially come to them?
This isn't something I do, but I will say that one of the bosses that I worked with, he and his wife used to sit down at the, when everybody makes your New Year's resolutions and you decide you're going to give up chocolate or whatever else. My husband always gives up something like roller skating that he's never done. But anyway, so, this guy used to sit down with his wife, and they used to do their career objectives for the year. And I thought it was really sad, but actually I think it's really clever. And I think had I done that, and had I had somebody, I mean, he and his wife clearly they were both managing directors, so they very much could obviously help each other. But I spent 11 years running the co-op's farming business, and I shouldn't have stayed there that long. I loved it, but when people asked me what I was doing with my career, I could almost burst into tears. I got stuck. I didn't mean to be doing it for that long. And I think it does help, if you are enjoying yourself, that doesn't necessarily mean you're doing the right thing. It may well be that it's time to move on and do something different. And that's where it helps, whether you've got a mentor, whether you've got a partner you can discuss it with, or whether you just do it for yourself and just sit down and say, well, what do I want from life at the moment? And am I getting it? I think it's very easy with people in careers, particularly if you're happy, to not stop and plan and think, where am I going next? And I think that it's interesting. I think John said, he said, I'd had a successful career, but I think I could in many ways actually say that my career was a sequence of failures. But I'm not going to talk about all of those. I succeeded in what I did, but that wasn't quite where I wanted to be. And I would like to have done more.
Okay, so as you climb to more sort of senior positions within companies, is it better to stay for perhaps a bit longer than you would at a slightly lower level position, in that it can be quite disruptive, sort of, but if you're in a more sort of managing director type position, if you're only there for a short amount of time?
I'd say that some of the most successful people that I know actually never left the company, and they just stayed there and they kept getting progressed and moving through. So I think it very, very much depends on the company that you're with. Mars was brilliant. Mars, you'd have your head down doing a job and they'd pluck you out and give you something completely different to do that you had no idea that you could do, and they would just give it to you. So some businesses are fantastic and you can stay there your whole career, and other businesses will sort of leave you doing the job. Which is, I think that's what pretty much happened when I was at the co-op. And I will say that the entire management at the co-op is completely different now. So it's not a reflection of the people that are there now. But I think they would have left me there my whole career doing that particular one. So I think you've got to understand the business you're in and whether they're going to move you. And certainly when you get to the point when you're at non-executive director level, they strongly recommend that you should never be in the role for more than 9 years, because you need new people to come in with new ideas. And when I was the groceries code adjudicator, which I did for seven and a half years, I thought it was time to move on. I didn't know what to do next. I didn't have any great big new ideas, and it was the time for somebody else to come in. So there is a good time. I think 11 years is too long. 7 to 8 years is quite good when you're at very senior levels. But you've got to make sure that you're happy and you're enjoying it, and make sure that you haven't run out of ideas, because if you have, it's time for somebody else.
Yeah, quite. So when it comes to, as you mentioned, you involved in MDS. So what was it that attracted you to be part of it? And obviously it must have drawn you in somewhere or other.
I think everybody, just somebody came up to me and said, have you thought about doing this? And to be absolutely honest, my response was, I don't want another unpaid job, thank you. She said, no, actually it is paid. And then I actually thought I was being offered the job. So having looked into it and deciding, actually, yes, I think I would quite like to do this. It's a day a week, so it's a reasonable commitment. I then discovered that actually I wasn't being offered it. I was just now one of a group of candidates going for it, and I then had to go through a proper process to get it. And of course, once you start doing that, it's great because you have to research it. You've got to, just like you did when you were joining MDS, you have to do some research, you have to do presentations and things, and it makes you research and find out what you're doing. And I think that when you look back on your life and all of the things that you worked on. I mean, I worked on one of the bids for the National Lottery for Vodafone, and we didn't win it. So you could argue that was sort of maybe 18 months work that went down the drain. And I could look at the co-op farms and everything I built up there, and then they sold it to somebody else, and now it's all split up. And you could say that was a whole load of work that went down the drain. And I could talk about my marketing campaigns at Mars, which, some of them actually are still used. The Milky Way one is still used. But you think, is that work that's gone down the drain? And that's when you look back and you think, it's not what you realise at the time, but the most enduring impact I had on my career has always been on people and helping people achieve what they maybe thought they couldn't. You're guiding people and taking them forward. And I think that recognising that was the most enduring impact I had, MDS then dovetailed into that beautifully, which is now, we get to say we're recruiting between, well, it used to be 30 a year, it's now about 45 a year graduates onto our scheme. And the impact that we can have on them by helping, through the training, through contacts that we do, through the work opportunities we can have, is going to change them forever. And what's more, bringing so many bright young things into the industry is going to change the industry as well. So it's when it took me almost a whole career to realise that the real impact we all have is on people.
Okay, so yeah, because from my perspective, the opportunity that they can somehow manage to cram into 2 years, having 4 different placements at such high-level companies that I think perhaps you wouldn't always have access to because they might not have their own graduate scheme themselves. I think in terms of setting you up for a future career, I think is a brilliant springboard.
Yeah.
So
we should maybe talk about some of the companies. You Finsbury, and you're about to go to is it Greenyard you're going to next?
Yeah, so I started at Finsbury in October 2020.
Yeah.
I had to move up to Glasgow. Yeah, it was a very interesting experience, but I had a great time. But I was in an operational support role. So I was basically working with the operations manager to do all sorts of improvement projects within the factory. And so moving to a new city, I'd never been in the factory environment before. That was a whole new learning curve. And the sort of immersion I had was unbelievable because you're just thrown, because you're only there for 6 months, which seems like a long time, but actually goes amazingly quickly. You're just thrown in, and it's full speed from day one.
And to be honest, Max, everybody who joined your year in October 2020 has had the most extraordinary experience because some of them actually rarely went into the office at all. To join a new company during COVID when you're only there for 6 months and you need to make an impact, I think it's been testing on all of you, and I think you've all done brilliantly. The members have been fantastic as well. But I think we should maybe talk about this. We have a lot of growers as our members. We've got about 65 members of MDS now. And we've got growers, we've got asparagus, tomato, lettuce growers. Some of them are small, some of them are 500 million turnover. And we also have retailers. We've got Aldi, Sainsbury's, Iceland, Morrison's as retailers. And then I think we've got 5 agrochemical companies. I think we've got 15 people at the moment with Syngenta in Basel. So, the opportunities and the things that you're going to do are going to be so different. But what you all have in common is you're going to end up somewhere. You're almost acting like a consultant. They're paying a day rate to have you there, and you've got to achieve and you've got to get going. And I think for people who are, I think that's the big challenge of MDS is you're going to have 4 different locations. Sometimes you'll only get 2 or 3 weeks notice of where you're going. That's if you're lucky, it might be less. And then you've got to find somewhere to live, and you've got to arrive, and you've got to hit the ground running, and you've got to find yourself a social life, which during COVID has been really hard.
Yeah, I was in the fortunate position where I was going into the office every day. But no, I think you're right. Certainly some people in my group, I don't think have ever actually been to the office. Day one was sat at the desk in their bedroom. I think that really is quite tough. But no, I think you're right. I think if we can make it through in these times, I think normal times would seem quite easy. Well, not easy, but relatively.
Yeah, and of course we've got the apprenticeship all of that training's gone online, hasn't it?
Yeah.
You've all been doing assignments, and I've had quite a few people saying to me that they're finding doing a job and moving and doing assignments at the same time is all just too much. Saying, I'm afraid this is life. What you are now learning is that you've got to pass this assignment. You don't have to get top marks. You've just got to work out how you're going to balance all of the things that are going on. and get through. But life often throws more at you than you can cope with, and that's a life lesson.
Yeah, I've had people sort of say to me that perhaps the fact that in MDS you have to move around so much is a bit off-putting. But I think if you embrace the idea of moving to 4 different locations, you got 4 different places to explore, new people to meet, new job, new roles, new challenges. If you embrace it and see it as something to overcome rather than shy away from, I think you come out the other end, in a much better position.
I think also the fact, if you're going to be in 4 different companies and do 4 different jobs, it's almost by definition you're going to have to move. So the moving bit comes with, yes, I want to do 4 jobs, I want to do 4 different things. And I think that's why we have an incredibly high retention rate, because virtually everybody finishes the program. Because if you're doing something that you don't like, you've only got to do it for another few more months, and then you'll do something completely different. And then there's the support network of your cohort, and there's the support network of us trying to get you through if you're having a difficult time. And I think the most common feedback we get at the end when people are coming to the review boards after they've sort of done their 2 years, the most common feedback is that they learned the most about themselves in the 6 months that they found the hardest. They learned what they didn't like. They learned how they could cope. So if you've enjoyed all of yours, that's brilliant. But we do get some people that struggle, but they do get through it.
Yeah, and I think so. Definitely, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And like I said, if you come out the other end, and whether you like it or not, at least you find out what you don't like.
Yeah, and you will come out the end resilient. I mean, there's I was talking about these headhunters and recruitment people, and a few of them actually talk about that they're looking for an MDS type. And an MDS type is a can-do. I think John used that word, a can-do person. If you've coped with your 4 moves, which might have taken you from Aberdeenshire to Basel to Spalding to Glasgow, then that's going to, there's not much that's going to faze you.
And I think, like John said as well, I think it's a very similar culture to the RAU in that I can think of so many of my friends who, in the summer holidays, up sticks and went to live in a mobile home somewhere in East Anglia and spent 100 hours a week in a tractor cab. If you can do that, you can easily go and work a 9-to-5 job in a nice office somewhere, just a little bit further away from home.
I think they're not all 9-to-5 jobs.
Matt, is it worth taking a couple of questions? Because we've got a couple of questions on the board that are relevant to this conversation.
Yeah.
Should we go to Adrian Ivory first? Adrian, do you want to ask your question? Or maybe the technology is not ready.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, yes. Yeah. Hi, Adrian.
My question is talking about having an impact on people. What is your view on the Blue Peter situation and kids not having any agriculture in their education?
Adrian, you're going to have to tell me what this Blue Peter situation is.
They are awarding a green badge for going vegan or meat-free because they said that's going to save the planet.
Oh, crikey! Now I'm afraid I wasn't aware of that. I think my view of whether people should be educated about food and where it comes from and agriculture and the environment is very important. And to be honest, they're crying out for it because the understanding of we've got to get to carbon neutrality and commitments from farming to get to net zero. And people wanting to, recognizing we can't have packaging, we've got to make sure that children actually understand and can make these trade-offs for themselves and recognize that just doing one thing like giving up meat is not going to be the answer to everything. And I remember when I was at Anchor, there was a big fuss about saturated fats. And everybody suddenly thought, oh, well, if I eat, I can't believe it's not butter or utterly butterly. I don't need to worry about fat. Well, that's not the answer either. You've got to understand holistically everything that all of the impacts of everything you're doing. And actually, in fact, some of the products that people started eating instead of butter ended up having trans fatty acids in them, which were even worse for you.
Thank you, Christine. Can we
Have you got another question? Or
John Wibberley. John.
Well, thank you. I put one or two up there. I don't know which one you want to choose, Mr. Chairman, but chiming with what Christine says about the importance of mentoring, very important. I just asked a question about how you cope with the pressure that you talked about in the conversation, and what you think about the importance of retaining some staff longer term who kind of carry the history of a company, whilst you want a turnover of new entrants to bring fresh blood and innovation. What about the importance of a long-term cohort in a company?
Yeah, well, I think I'll talk about the pressure first, because resilience is one of the areas that we clearly all need to focus on, and something that we at MDS have been particularly aware of with our trainees, many of whom are in their first ever jobs. Some of them are living a long way from home, and particularly with COVID and everything else going on, that is difficult. And I think the important thing is to stress with everybody a work-life balance, and to know when and how to ask for help. And MDS, like many other businesses, has helplines that, totally independent helplines run by third party that will help people if they get under stress. But I think the key thing is keep fit, look after yourself, and keep social, keep talking to people, keep doing things. But I think resilience is it's a very big thing, and I think that particularly with the generation of trainees that we've got now, we're putting them through an awful lot, and it's you need to be a caring organisation, and at the risk of being very politically incorrect, we've got to know when we need to tell somebody to man up and get on with it, and they're just whinging, and when we recognise that actually someone needs help. And it isn't always easy, but we're good at it because we've got so many of them. And hopefully that addresses your question on pressures. But I think, I've got children now in their 20s. I have always given my weekends to my family. And I think that's very important. That's what I'm talking about, the work-life balance, is just working out when you're there for your kids and when you're away for work. And on you mentioned mentoring as well, that it's hard to find a mentor, but one of the things I do is I run a women in food and farming network, specifically to try and help many, lots of women do find that they're the only woman doing the sort of job they are, and is to link them and say, no, you're not, there are masses of us and we're all here to help you. And that's one of the networks which I've sort of got involved with, to try and help people find mentors. And I don't necessarily mean a permanent mentor, but just somebody that you can go and have a chat with about things when they go wrong.
I'll just add on that, on the question regarding pressures. I mean, my intake of graduates, I think there's 23 of us. We've never met in person, only virtually, but there's a huge amount of support. We have a WhatsApp group which is constantly going off. We've had several evenings on a sort of Friday night where we'll just send a text round and have a drink on Zoom, just have a chat, as well as all the training days where we're going into breakout rooms and so on. But we've never met in person, but we're all going through the same thing, and it's amazing how everyone sort of clubs together and looks after each other.
Thanks, Max. Max, there's a question from William White. We'll go to William White, and then I'll come back to you, Max, and let you continue a bit further before we then go back to questions, because the questions are coming in. But William's question relates to MDS and mentoring. Over to you, William.
Good evening. How do MDS mentors get allocated to their mentees? Are there any criteria? Is it random? And I'd probably just like to say that Max, I'd say, is very lucky having Christine as his mentor.
Well, I think we maybe overemphasised me as a mentor. I think I'm really there for anybody that wants to talk to me. And I currently, at the moment, am just spending individual sessions with every one of the trainees to see where I can help them. So I think I'm not necessarily just Max's. I'll do it for everybody. But we take the role of the secondment manager wherever they're working extremely seriously, and we will train those secondment managers. So when somebody is in a place of work, they have a secondment manager who is maybe their line manager, but not necessarily. And we've got people in the office. There used to be one person, but we've got so many trainees now, we've got two. And they're in contact with the trainees, certainly when they first start, almost weekly, to make sure that they're okay. So it's almost like the office is making sure that they're okay, and the secondment manager is making sure that they understand the role, that they've been properly inducted, that they're there if they're getting stuck. But they don't leave MDS necessarily with a mentor. They might have met somebody along the way, but we don't plan a mentor for each individual person, but we are there. The role of MDS is really, as a group, is that we are helping them through the programme.
Yeah, and also on top of that, we each get assigned a sort of buddy, they call it, who's generally 2 or 3 secondments ahead, so who's been through the system for a bit longer, and I think it's just there just to answer questions and be someone to lean on for advice. Are we going to have one more question for you? Or are we waiting for the end, John?
Let's do them at the end.
Okay,
carry on.
So, Christian, I thought we'd move on to your involvement with Red Tractor and a few other things you've done in the past. Someone mentioned in one of the questions about sort of education surrounding where food comes from and that sort of thing. And where do you think that the responsibility for that lies anywhere, particularly in the industry? Is that the role of the retailers, the likes of Red Tractor, or is that more for the producers?
Education comes back to the national curriculum. That's what we're starting with. So that's where it needs to be started in the first place. And then, I think that everything that the rest of us can do, the better. But, if it's not on the national curriculum, Open Farm Sunday once a year, marvellous though it is not going to fill that gap. So we need to get it properly embedded and understood. I'm on the BBC Rural Affairs Committee, and our role is to inform the BBC programmes from the news and Farming Today through to Countryfile, Costing the Earth, the food programme, about the issues that need to be covered. And one of the reasons I do that is to try and get publicity and stories around where people's food comes from. And I have to say, I think that there's more programmes on farming and where food comes from on now than I can ever remember. But that's because there's an appetite for it as well. They put them on and everybody watches them. Countryfile, I believe, is the most watched documentary on BBC, which is fabulous. They see it as a documentary. I think most of us think that something's a bit more like a magazine, but anyway, it is very popular. So I think it's not just the education on the national curriculum, it's then reinforcing it and keeping it the whole way through. And I think I would say the onus on everybody else is not to tell lies and not to mislead. And I'm sick of seeing farmers with string tied round their trousers in the middle of a field speaking with a West Country accent. When probably they're just as likely to be female in a tractor cab and using computers. I just think let's show it how it really is, or how we want it to be, rather than bucolic and, as old-fashioned and twee.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think it's a shared responsibility across the whole industry, really. And you mentioned about people should, one way is to avoid lying. Be transparent. When you sort of started getting involved with the likes of Co-op Farms and then your role as a regulator and with Red Tractor, is there anything in particular that shocked you or impressed you, within the food industry?
When I was at Mars, we talked about fast-moving consumer goods. It's often shortened to FMCG. And we really, I think, thought we were the bee's knees of the food industry. Everything moved very fast. If you've worked, John will say the same, he worked for KFC all those years. He'll say, we were leading edge. There's nothing more sort of consumer-led and fast-moving than what we do. And then you see fresh produce, and you've got a product with a shelf life of 5 days, and you've got something that, that the sun comes out and everybody wants a load more of, and then you get a drop in temperature and they don't want them anymore. There is nothing is harder than fresh produce. You have to be absolutely at the forefront of everything you're doing to run a fresh produce business. And I don't think I had realised how difficult it was, how tiny the margins are at what you do, and how you just have to continually focus on improvement. And I'm, certainly, well, I don't think we've got there in the UK yet, but they're in certain countries, the brightest and the best people, if you go to Holland, all working in fresh produce, they're working in the greenhouses. The financial responsibility that people have working in that industry are massive. So I think that it was a shock to me. I don't know if anybody's seen the pictures of Dyson's latest strawberry farm on, strawberry greenhouses on YouTube. It just goes on and on and on with automatic gates, and it's just phenomenal. So I think fresh produce shocked me just how way ahead I think it is from what I thought was the leading edge in the food industry. And I think the other thing which you and your generation will find out, actually I was speaking to somebody just earlier on today, she said, I can't believe, she said, it's a huge business. She said, I can't believe the stupid things that they do, or how inefficient things are, or how chaotic they are. And she said, and just by asking stupid questions, she said, I've been able to point out things that they can do better. And I think that is a shock. You think that the industry is so focused and the margins are so tiny that nobody would be doing anything that wasn't totally joined up and sensible and efficient. And I think there's still so much more to be gained by retailers working with the whole of the supply chain back down to the growers to make the whole chain as efficient as it possibly can be. And when we talk about waste and forecasting and things like that, there's so much more to be gained there. And therefore, anybody bright coming into the industry that asks stupid questions is going to make a difference. And I don't really mean stupid questions. I mean questions that are just saying, why are we doing this?
I think especially, looking back at MDS, I think having a fresh set of eyes every 6 months must be quite a sort of big contributor to a company, like you said, pointing things out.
One member company said to me the other day, they said, we like having all these MDS people coming in and with all of their new ideas. He said, it keeps the rest of the business on their toes. I thought that was interesting.
And you mentioned there about the retailers sort of working back down the supply chain to try and make everything as conjoined and efficient as possible. But since you've left co-op farms, the farms have subsequently been sold. Do you think moves like that are actually essentially, it's a fighting a rising tide when stuff like this farms are sold? Is that making it more difficult to integrate the supply chains as much as possible?
I don't think I know the answer to that, because the co-op was absolutely completely integrated. If you go to the turn of the 20th century, they not only had their own tea plantations in Malaysia, they had their own shipping fleets, they had their own factories, they had their own farms, had their own mills, they had their own bakeries. It was absolutely totally integrated, and it just ended up not being flexible, not being fleet of foot. And as you can see, the whole thing's gone now, and all they've got left is essentially is the food business, with other people doing some of the intermediary bits more efficiently. So I'm not advocating it all should be one business, but I do mean that they are all working together, and that whereas they might all be fighting over who's going to have what percent of the cake, it's much more sensible if you can work out how to make the cake bigger, so that you might end up with a smaller percentage, but it's of a bigger cake. And so I think it's just about being open to the challenges and understandings in your supply chain, being prepared to listen to them, the people being able to having the courage to be able to talk about the issues that they're having, to try and resolve some of them. And that was the beauty of my role in the Groceries Code Adjudicator role, that I was able to identify where the issues were and to try and help them find ways through it. Particularly if I could find a link to the Groceries Code and a reason why I had to intervene. So it's about how do you understand what the issues are. I mean, the number of times I used to meet people who, they would say, this is before I took on the regulator role, and they'd say, if a retailer asks me to jump, I say, how high? Now, actually, you should be saying, why? What are we trying to achieve? Is there a better way of doing it?
So on that point, is the retailer-led structure of the industry the right way to go into the future, or is it a case of perhaps going back to more locally produced bigger focus on seasonal produce, that sort of thing. Are we going to progress like that with the retailer structure that we have?
I think we're definitely going to progress with the retail structure that we've got, but I think that the retailers are now working much closer with their growers. In many cases, they've been taking out the middlemen so that they are much closer to the growers. They're working on longer term contracts. They're recognising that post-Brexit that it's more important to know, to understand your supply lines. So I think we've still got the retailers working, but working better and more efficiently and more closely with their growers. But also with there's a massive market growing of people being able to supply direct to the public. And I know some of the big brands are looking at how they can supply direct to the public. There will be more routes to market so that people who want to have local food and delivered direct to them and all that sort of thing will all happen as well. But we'll just get more choice.
Yeah, I agree. I think the likelihood of us going back to sort of small farm shops everywhere, I think, is tricky.
But also, I would say that I was shocked that some of our MDS members. I mean, one fresh produce business grew from 50 million to 300 million in 5 years, and 96% of what it produces goes to one retailer. I mean, that would have been unheard of 10 years ago, but that is just how, some of the people who are working very, very closely together. They said it was under the protection of the codes. You're thinking, well, maybe that has enabled that, but it's just, that shows a completely different level of trust.
Yeah. No, I think it's amazing how far the industry's come and how it's all changed and everything. But, and I think it'll be interesting to see where it ends up in the future. But is it? I was wondering, John, is it time to move on to some questions?
I think it's very good time. So the next question comes from Fiona Galbraith. So hopefully, Fiona, you're in the lobby and ready to give Christine your question.
Hi. Yeah. So thank you very much. I'm very interested in this idea that you led with about resilience and robustness and the values that people can bring. Because I work as an ex-military myself, I work with military service leavers, trying to make it easier for them to transition into food production and land management. Because I firmly believe that the industry is changing so fast, it's a valuable place to bring in parallel approaches, management and creativity and so forth from other industries, including defence. How much value do you think employers in the industry are able to put on to transferable skills such as creativity, project management, entrepreneurship, and how much value is really needed to be vested in prior career experience in the industry itself?
Wow, that's brilliant. You're giving me the opportunity to go straight in and say that when we recruit into MDS with undergraduates, we are looking for leadership potential, and we take very little notice of the degree that they've done. We've got people with degrees in bioarchaeology, languages, geography. We even had somebody who did music production degree. And they are absolutely brilliant. And we need all of those skills in our industry. And those are the sorts of people we're recruiting onto MDS. So yes, we will come to the RAU to recruit. We'll go to Harper Adams to recruit. But I would have said 80% of our recruits have got no farming background, and they are absolutely brilliant. And the majority of them, I think 85% of the trainees, when they finish the 2-year program, join our members. So that's all in the food industry. And I think we did a survey going for about 35 years, and 85% of all of the alumni that we found are still in the food industry. So regardless of the degrees they've done, we're able to show them how the food industry is super exciting and that there are roles for good leaders everywhere. And I don't really know what stage some of these people are, but we would certainly be interested in people. Certainly, I think. I don't know, we haven't tried people over 30, but certainly people tend to be under the age of 30 when they're joining MDS. And if they've got leadership potential that they've demonstrated in the army, we have been saying we would very much like to have a program where people haven't necessarily done a degree, but had done something else. And we put them through exactly the same training, exactly the same experience as the graduates. But ideally, we don't really want 17 and 18-year-olds. We want people who've cut it a bit in life, but whether they've cut their life in the army or at university, wow, this whole new opportunity opening up there. But we're just looking for leaders, and that's what the industry needs.
Christine, we'll now go on to a question from John Hoy. John, are you there? Over to you.
Thank you. Yes, good evening, Christine. Another question really about career path and career progression. I'm just interested in your thoughts on taking a step down the ladder, perhaps if an opportunity comes along to join maybe a larger organisation where ultimately you can progress your career in the longer term, but you need to be brave to take that step.
Yeah, I don't think many people go down. They sometimes go sideways. And I think I had quite a few friends who took a year out and did an MBA to sort of have a year of reflection and get extra study before you moved on. But that's quite a brave thing to do, you know, not to earn anything for a year. But I think particularly with Max's generation, but actually why shouldn't it be for all of us? I think what's important is to make sure that you can align yourself with the values of that organisation. And I think if the organisation you're with doesn't, you just don't agree with the principles or how they work, then do anything you can to get out. But I don't think you really need to go downwards, as you said it. I think sideways, or maybe to learn a new skill before you go back into the industry. But certainly, if I were mentoring somebody that was thinking about that, I would try and find a way of making it a sideways rather than what almost might sound like a backwards move. But I think aligning with the values of the business and knowing why you wanted to move, I think is important.
Thanks, Christine. Great answer. I remember my interview with PepsiCo a long time ago, and the first question they asked me was, "What are your values?" So it was very relevant. Diana, you had a few questions, but I think you're going to ask about food standards. So Diana Davidson's next.
Hi, thank you so much. I've been fascinated to listen to Christine. Christine, you were saying earlier that you're looking for leaders. What's interesting in terms of my question is looking at Amazon, an IT company now they call themselves, looking at data to look at creating their own standards for food right across their global supply chains, and looking at that as being the basis in which standards are created in their own format. I wondered what impact you think this will have as more and more of us during COVID are buying food online.
I think you've thrown me a bit, because I wasn't aware that they were using data to define their own standards, and I wasn't sure if you're sort of talking about this as a red tractor thing, but I think there is so much more that the whole of our industry can get out of data, and I think that a lot of farming businesses are going to be using their own data much more. Well, I said we need to give them the tools to be able to use their data better to make their own decisions. I think, you know, from a red tractor point of view, one of my concerns is that when you're buying things online, you can't necessarily tell whether it is a British, you know, whether it's British or whether it's red tractor assured, which I think is one of the things that I want to work with the retailers. Some of them are already picking this up, but as online purchasing is getting a much bigger proportion, then it actually becomes more important to, if we have got a standard and that consumers want it, that it's something that they can find when they're buying online. But the use of data, we're all going to use more data, and farmers will as well. But I'm not sure I've totally answered your question, but that's partly because I don't really understand what you're saying Amazon are doing with data on standards. But at the moment, I shall be continuing to plough my own furrow on the British standards and on red tractor. But I'll try and find out what you're talking about and make sure it's not a big threat coming down the line at us.
Thanks, Christine. And I think we all agree opportunity for red tractor online to do more there. We've got a question from James Waddington. James, over to you.
Hi there.
Hi, James.
Hi, thank you very much. Just a quick question, really, to both Christine to start with, and then Max, maybe if you want to get involved. I'm starting MDS next week in Group 49 and wondered what advice you might give to aspiring young candidate feeling slightly apprehensive about new starts?
Well, first of all, I'd say you've got nothing to worry about. There's about 22 more people starting at the same time as you. That it's our responsibility at MDS to, I will say, virtually hold your hand and help you. There will be a proper induction. We won't let you loose without helping you. And I think then the other thing is to be aware of that there are another 60 trainees that will be there to try and help you. And also there's an alumni of about another 500 all over the industry. And I spoke to one of our members today that hasn't really engaged a lot with us recently. And I said, well, there's no need to be a member. He said, I don't know, we need to be because, there's such a network of MDS that, we need to keep in on them and make sure that we might find that our buyers from MDS in the future. So we need to keep, we need to be involved with the network. So don't worry, James. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. And well done for speaking up already. I mean, you're clearly the sort of person we want to recruit. Max, have you got any better advice?
I would just say, everyone's going to be nervous turning up. It's like your first day of school. Everyone's going to be nervous. You're all in the same boat. But I think, just like I said earlier, just embrace it. And the more enthusiastic and the more you commit to it, and just really try and make the most of every single day, during your 6 months, the more you get out of it. It's definitely I don't know where you're going to, but some of the comments have a very have MDS graduates for years and have a very structured process. Others, you might be the first graduate going there, but whatever you're doing, take every opportunity that they offer. Even if it's completely different to what you want to do, what your role is meant to be. There's no harm in at least trying it. And if you don't like it, then you don't want to do that. I think just be enthusiastic and give everything a go. That's all I'd say.
Good advice, Max. Thanks very much for that. Joe, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, Christine, there are many questions I'd like to ask you because it's been a fascinating tour de force. Thank you very much. But I would like to ask you that if you were what advice would you give the 14-year-old Christine if you were talking to her now as a mentor? How would you advise this passionate young woman who suddenly fell in love with the idea of engineering? Would you try to support that line? Would you encourage us to take that line or advise her in a different direction?
I think, I would still say to take that line. I would still say to look for the positives in every job you do because you'll enjoy it. But there's one lady that I should have stuck to. She was trying to help me and I wasn't listening. And I would say, listen to her. You should have stayed with her. She was the person that was trying to be your mentor. And I didn't think I needed her. And the other piece of advice I'd give myself, which is far too late now, is to speak to my husband a bit more about my career decisions. I rarely told him when I was applying for a job in case I didn't get it. And so he generally ended up just being told, well, we're going to have to move to Manchester now because I've got a job with the co-op. And I think, I maybe should have been a bit kinder and involved him a bit more in my decisions. And, I'm slightly envious of that boss of mine that felt that he could sit down with his wife every year and talk about career and where they wanted to go.
Yeah, it's because I was musing on it because I think I'm older than you. And then when I graduated, because being a vet, nobody talks about careers. You had a profession that you entered and you just did it. And I think, in some ways, I feel optimistic that what we've got now with the graduates that you're mentoring and that you've got MSD, that people do think about careers and do think you can change and move ahead. Whereas I think it was very different a long time ago, particularly if you did a profession like engineering or something. So Thank you very much.
But I also think that, we forget that the food manufacturing industry is the biggest industry in the UK. And we need accountants and we need linguists and we need HR professionals. We don't just need farmers. There is a huge range of skills. And, people who understand the farming and might join a business as a farmer may well end up doing a completely different job. But I think the other thing I probably would also say is a big piece of advice is you have to be really careful in this industry because you will end up working for somebody that you maybe had been rude to somewhere else. You don't know when they're going to pop back up. So never burn your bridges. Always be nice and polite to everybody, because we are a close industry and people move all over the place. So yeah, don't burn bridges, and always respect other people.
Christine, thank you very much for that. I think I just finished with one very quick question before I hand it over to Louise. You mentioned about the awareness of careers broader than just agriculture. I studied agriculture, ended up actually working for Sainsbury's as my first job. But any suggestions from your thoughts on how, particularly as an institution like the RAU that's teaching people agriculture and land management, we can broaden the opportunities for people?
Well, make sure
I think
just know about NDS, because we are honestly, it's like doing another MBA. You're actually coming in and you're doing another degree about getting into the industry if that's what you wanted to do. But there are loads and loads of really good companies, but they're just not. They're not like all of the PwCs and the Unilever, the names that you know, but there are a lot of very big businesses, masses of fresh produce business with over 100 million turnover, who are totally responsible, help you with your careers, good managers. So there are lots of businesses, and particularly if you know what area of the country you want to work in, you can then just start looking at that area of the country, identifying the big businesses, and start writing to them and saying, I'm a graduate, I'm looking for having a career in the industry. Can I come and talk to you?
Good advice. Thank you very much for that. Right, I think we hand over now to Louise to wrap up. Louise Manning.
Hi. Well, wow, what a conversation. And first of all, I'd like to thank John for introducing and managing all the questions that were coming in all through the session. I'd also like to thank Max. Thank you, Max, for really talking about that mindset, for talking about how you had to be agile, you have to be resilient, and have to look and seizing the day. And I think that is advice for everybody, no matter where they are in their career. And thank you too for your questions. And thank you, Christine. Thank you for your thoughtfulness in how you responded to all the questions. Thank you for your insight and your honesty about the career that you've had, and very often how you learn as much from when things go well as when things don't go so well. So thank you very much for that. And I think what also came out was this idea of organizational memory and how you combine bringing the energy of young people into a sector and a business, but still being able to retain that organizational memory. Critical at farm level, but also in businesses in terms of succession management and data and information management. So thank you everybody for contributing to what's been a really fascinating conversation.